Members of the Board of Trustees and Trustees Emeriti, Colby overseers, faculty, administrative colleagues, parents, and families of graduating seniors, and of course today, above all others, members of this great class of 2012, welcome to this baccalaureate service, the first official moment in Colby's 191st commencement. Students value traditions, I know, so I'll begin this address, as I always do, by reminding us that the baccalaureate service has a very long history at Colby. We've been coming together in this way since 1821. That is, for as long as students have been graduating from the college. This tradition is especially meaningful, I think, as we approach the formal opening of Colby's bicentennial celebrations next fall. Of course, the program has changed with the times. The first 87 baccalaureate addresses at Colby were delivered by presidents who were also Baptist ministers. You can imagine, I am sure, the challenges of enduring a long sermon on a warm spring day. A lot has changed at Colby and elsewhere, and I won't be delivering a sermon, but we continue to meet in this special place in company. We dress up and march to the chapel in our medieval garb. The seniors come together for nearly the last time, and the president rises to speak. It has been so for 191 years, and so it will be, I am sure, for at least that many more. Part of the reason for our commitment to this tradition has to do with the timeless urge to say farewell in this rather focused way, but the ceremony also reminds us of what these years have been about and where the most important things have happened among students and teachers and among students and classmates in both formal and informal places and ways. And so the president is supposed to say something meaningful about all of this in a time frame not exceeding 20 minutes. And so, as 18 Colby presidents have done before me, let me offer my own form of farewell to the seniors and share some reflections on how your Colby experience has prepared you for what comes next. I take it as a sign of things to come that the winter of your senior year was unseasonably warm and that spring arrived early. When you look back on this year, I am sure you will recall fondly, I know I will, those weird days in March when the temperature exceeded 70 degrees. I'll resist the temptation to speculate on the relationship among those wondrous moments, climate change, and the influences of human activity on the warming of the globe. Tomorrow, Colby will give an honorary degree to Ralph Cicerone, who, as you will hear in the citation I read, is far better versed than I in these matters. But I can't help but note, parenthetically, that those among you who brushed up against Colby's rapidly expanding commitment to environmental studies and sustainability, and there are many of you, are now equipped to join the public discussion of these important matters. Indeed, I suspect that some of you will be leaders in that discussion. So it was an eerily warm spring, for whatever reason. It was also a relatively quiet one, at least until a few weeks ago. It may surprise you to know that sometime around the middle of March, my administrative colleagues and I begin to wonder about the nature and intensity of what we call the spring thing, that issue or incident or cause that almost invariably galvanizes the campus every year and makes our lives interesting. But this year, the spring thing never quite arrived. It was curiously calm, well into April. Even the digest was relatively quiet. And that's saying something. I have to admit that I found this calm a bit unnerving. Perhaps it's because we're so accustomed to the season of turmoil. Or perhaps it's because we just need the excitement. Whatever the reason, as April went along, I felt a little depressed and a little bored. And much to the horror of my administrative colleagues, I decided to stir things up. And so, as you know, I sent out a message having to do with a controversial substance, informing the community of my intention to ban it in the reasonably near future. In one way, this should have not surprised anyone. I am, after all, the author of Brohibition. Not the phrase, of course, but the deeds that caused the brilliant class of 2003 to invent the phrase. I actually spend a good deal of time in my office sitting around dreaming up things to ban. And tobacco seemed like a logical choice. And my message was noticed. The digest lit up like a Christmas tree. Finally, the spring thing. There were many memorable posts, most of them lamenting and condemning my overreaching authority, but the one I liked best, combining in perfect measure doses of irony, disdain, and humor, was this one. You're not my mom. Almost as good as Prohibition. And of course, it's true. There's almost nothing to say in response except perhaps, you've got me there, or maybe, you're my daddy. A community forum followed. That's actually a good practice of ours, though I must admit it's not always easy for me to stand up in front of a group and defend controversial actions or policies. But it's important for us as a group to emerge from time to time from our technologically mediated conversations on Facebook or the Digest or Twitter to actually look one another in the eye and talk. And so we did. And while I doubt that our fundamental positions were much affected, we aired our differences in a direct and respectful and a civil way. I also heard very clearly the disappointment among some that I did not consult more widely with students in coming to my decision. It's a criticism well meant, I know, and also well taken. Earlier this year, in February, in fact, there was another such forum, larger and occasioned by an incident in the fall that rocked us all for a time. I must admit that the prospect of meeting, in light of the material and strength of feeling about it, caused me to lose a little sleep. But my foreboding, as it turned out, was unwarranted. What might have been an occasion of finger-pointing and angry accusation became instead a remarkable display of listening and engaging. I heard people offer apologies and other people accepting those apologies while admitting their own shortcomings. I heard calls for community building, and for understanding. In short, I heard the best of and from Colby students, and it was enormously gratifying and encouraging. There's a related and somewhat broader point that I want to make here. Some of you saw Colby's own Mike Daisy, class of '96, perform his fascinating one-man show on the work and life of Steve Jobs at Strider in April. If you didn't see it, I hope you will see it someday. Daisy has become himself quite controversial for the ways in which his theatrical work merges fact and fiction. But that doesn't lessen the power of one of his central observations, namely that our lives are changing in radical and sometimes disturbing ways on account of the mediating influence of information technology. This has become something of a commonplace, I know, but it's nevertheless a terribly important fact. Yours is the first generation whose entire adolescence and early adulthood have been lived within and around the dazzling constructs of social media. You have been entirely, thoroughly, relentlessly mediated. Your teachers and parents have tried to keep up in this regard. I have a highly underdeveloped Facebook page, as some of you know, because we're friends, as a way of keeping up with you, but of course we can't really keep up. You are pioneers of a certain kind, and you will negotiate a terrain unknown and probably unknowable to those of us who passed into adulthood under very different circumstances. There are several good things to say about the recent advances in the mediated age. It's hard, for instance, to imagine the successes or maybe even the existence of popular movements around the world in recent years without the communication now made possible through social media. The technological advances of recent years have given us access to worlds of information that were previously unavailable, and we all understand the pleasures and problems with nearly instantaneous communication with our friends. Networking can be satisfying, if sometimes a risky thing. But it's also dangerously abstract. The thing we've all noticed about the digest, I'm sure, is how easily it accommodates, maybe even encourages, incivility. The person out there in the ether who just posted that clueless opinion is not this real person sitting next to me in the library, the dining hall, the classroom. He or she is a disembodied voice who evidently doesn't have the first inkling about what's so obvious to me. And so it is with almost every other form of digitally mediated communication. That landscape is one populated by abstract others with whom we have only the sparest connection. But here's a piece of good news about your education at Colby. Living with one another in this very intimate setting has given you access to a different kind of interpersonal experience and knowledge. It's the old-fashioned but still powerful face-to-face encounter with others, where physical presence is the precondition for everything else. Whether you know it or not, you have developed here at Colby a form of intellectual capital that will give you certain advantages in the future. That capital is what I'll call social knowledge, the art of working with others to solve problems or to create things, or simply to share. We probably don't talk about it enough, and the learning that it requires, as Robert Putnam, another of Colby's honorary degree recipients tomorrow, has insisted in his brilliant work. But it is one of the critical avenues of learning that you have traveled here at Colby, and you will find that the things you have acquired along the way are enormously and immediately useful and empowering. This is certainly one of the encouraging messages that I have gathered from young alumni around the country as I've met with them in the last couple of years. And speaking of technology, I'm sure that most of you are aware of the dramatic recent announcement by Harvard and MIT regarding their intention to create and distribute a digital curriculum. The initiative, called edX, will include hundreds of online courses offered by permanent faculty at both institutions, and they will be offered to the world for free and on open source platforms, inviting similar contributions from other institutions, who knows, maybe from Colby. Like Google's efforts several years ago to digitize every book not in the public domain, the Harvard and MIT announcement caused quite a stir. The stir has included some pretty wild speculation about the end of higher education as we know it at places like Colby, where students sit in classrooms with faculty and talk to one another. Even the otherwise cautious David Brooks recently opined in the New York Times that we are on the verge of a radical change in the way colleges and universities do their business. Quoting Stanford's president, John Hennessy, the catchy headline of Brooks' article is "The Campus Tsunami." And just this week, Tom Friedman predicted that Coursera, Stanford's venture into online education, would be revolutionary. Like many others, I'm intrigued by edX and Coursera, and it's important that Harvard and MIT and Stanford, great places with great faculty and immense resources, will now direct their formidable assets toward a project that might do a lot of good in the world. But the notion that a bundle of courses thrown up in the cloud will constitute a tsunami or revolution for higher education is, I think, hyperbolic. I'm sure that someday Colby will be using such resources, and perhaps those offered by edX, in ways that we can't now imagine, and that the educational experience we provide will be all the better for it. But the wholesale substitution of distance and digital learning for what I'll call embodied learning, students working in the physical presence of real faculty and one another in a common physical setting, won't happen, at least as long as we want to have the best system of higher education in the world. Most fundamentally, that's because we are, after all, social beings with minds that actually are in bodies, or better said, we are social beings with embodied minds. There's no way to separate thinking from our embodied life in the world. And those of you who studied Descartes know all about the problems of philosophical dualism, the separation of ideas of body and mind. The fascination with the notion of a comprehensively digital educational landscape shows how influential Descartes' thinking continues to be. But you don't need to be a philosopher to know this. There are important forms of learning that must and will proceed only by way of embodied presence and the interaction of students and teachers. That's the way it's been at Colby for almost 200 years, and that's the way in which you've come to know us and to know one another. The deeper social knowledge you all have as a result of your time here is a basic piece of the residential liberal arts college experience and one of its most important gifts to you. You'll find this out for yourselves very soon in your places of work or advanced professional and graduate education, where the ability to engage meaningfully and productively with others will be a truly valuable skill. Social knowledge is a valuable acquisition, but it's just the start of what you now have as a result of being at Colby. Among the first things you heard from me when you arrived was the following thought about your intellectual development here. I said, our deeper hope and expectation is that wherever you end up in Colby's interesting array of programs, each one of you, and in very much the same way, will experience a form of intellectual empowerment that will serve you in any and every kind of work you end up doing in your lives after Colby. The sense of empowerment I'm referring to will take the form of your confidence in a number of very basic intellectual skills, your ability to write and to speak with clarity, conviction, and authority, your ability to think about and through complex problems and issues, to analyze, to criticize, to synthesize, to integrate, and finally, your ability to exercise your imaginations and creative powers. Now, on the other side of your Colby adventure, what we want you to know and take away with you tomorrow is the certainty that you have indeed been empowered in these ways, and that what you take with you is the much more fully realized capacity to think and to write and to speak and to create. This form of empowerment is real, and it matters. Of course, that is not to say that the good and specific work you did in individual programs and disciplines was somehow beside the point, either intellectually or professionally. On the contrary, it's only through these very specific forms of engagement that this much more fundamental form of intellectual empowerment I'm describing is available. And there is a related and significant point about the importance of a deep understanding of a particular way of seeing the world. But wherever you found yourselves in Colby's curriculum, we intended for you to experience a common regime and regimen of intellectual challenge and exercise and accomplishment. Each and every one of you has been required to think hard and clearly about complex matters of real substance, to write and speak clearly and persuasively about things that matter, to exercise your imaginations in all kinds of ways. One of those ways is your capacity to insert yourselves into the moral dimension of experience, your own experience and those of others. By the moral dimension, I mean that zone of meaning and significance, the values and the goods by which people know and explain and justify their lives, and through which they encounter their most important and demanding choices and conflicts and dilemmas and satisfactions. I'm sure that the work of moral imagination in this sense was at times obvious to you, in and outside the classroom. If your undergraduate experience was anything like mine, and I'm sure it was, you found that some of your most enduring memories of college will include those late-night conversations with friends about the really big things, about politics or God or truth or justice or love or racism, the future of the planet, and those more formal moments in and around classrooms where your personal convictions were rocked, affirmed, and altered. But the stretching of your moral sympathy and imagination was at issue in many other and maybe less obvious ways, in your exposure to different languages and cultures, to the works of literary and artistic imagination, to the history of peoples and places both strange and familiar, to matters of social and political justice, to name a few. Indeed, one of the abiding ambitions of almost every part of the educational enterprise here was to equip you to be able and sympathetic interpreters of moral life and conflict, your own life and the lives of others. Tomorrow, Colby will extend an honorary degree to Tanya Ganella-Fritzner, president of the American Indian Law Alliance. I can think of few better role models for those of you who wish to devote your now expanded moral sympathies to the advancement of some pressing public cause. I'm quite certain that our speaker, Tony Blair, will also advance the proposition of the importance of living a life of service and public engagement. Here, too, I hope, I trust that Colby has inclined you to do so. Somewhere at the intersection of all these interesting capacities and exercises and workouts and pathways and connecting them all is one final quality that might be the most important of all. It's hard to name and describe, but it's easy to sense when you're in its presence. St. Augustine and Lao Tzu and Shakespeare had it, and so did Virginia Woolf. Einstein had it, and Darwin. Toni Morrison and Stephen Sondheim have it. Jane Austen and John Coltrane had it. Tom Waits has it. Randy Weston, also one of our honored guests tomorrow, surely has it. Cézanne had it. James Baldwin clearly had it. Joan Didion and Meryl Streep and Stephen Hawking have it. This is my list, of course. I know you have one of your own. What all of these individuals share is what I want to call depth. And what I'm trying to get at by way of referring to them is the remarkable thing that happens to us when we encounter and share exceptionally powerful insights into our inner lives and the world around us. For me, the phrase that best describes that experience is going deep. Going deep is the sensation of being more completely inserted into and aware of the world. It's that dizzying and moving moment of encountering some powerful new insight that moves us and changes us, and that makes us larger, more capacious, more complete human beings. In some way, and probably in several ways, each and every one of you has had the experience of going deep here at Colby. It may have been while looking through a microscope at the very moment that some part of the natural world revealed itself to you. It may have been while reading a difficult philosophical text late at night in the library. It may have been while struggling with a mathematical problem. It may have been while composing or painting or writing. It may have been while considering the life of a great historical figure or a great event. It may have been while looking at a painting in the museum. Wherever it was, something clicked. The world was suddenly rearranged. You saw something new and important about your life, or about the world, or both, and you became deeper. Going deep and being deep is not likely to be one of those things you say about yourselves on your resumes, though that would be interesting. And you're not likely to be asked about being deep and going deep in a job interview. But as your lives move along, as they become challenging and complex and rich in testing in the way all lives inevitably do, you will come to understand the value of depth and of going deep. And you will also understand why one of the ultimate purposes of a liberal arts education is to give you the means to become more fully realized people, more artful explorers of the deep. I know that this is starting to sound ethereal, perhaps even religious, so I'll bring us abruptly back to earth in order to make one final point. Several weeks ago, there was an article in the Wall Street Journal by Melissa Korn titled "Wealth or Waste? Rethinking the Business Major." While it's ostensibly about the undergraduate business curriculum in the United States, it's also about the value of the kind of educational structure you have participated in here at Colby. Here's a passage dedicated to you and to all those liberal arts graduates around the country who might be wondering at this very moment about their choice of major. She writes, "Undergraduate business majors are a dime a dozen on many college campuses, but according to some, they may be worth even less. More than 20% of U.S. undergraduates are business majors, nearly double the next most common majors, social sciences and history. The proposition has held relatively steady for about 30 years, but now faculty members, school administrators, and corporate recruiters are questioning the value of a business degree at the undergraduate level. The biggest complaint? The undergraduate degrees focus too much on the nuts and bolts of finance and accounting and don't develop enough critical thinking and problem-solving skills through long essays, in-class debates, and other hallmarks of liberal arts courses. Companies say they need flexible thinkers with innovative ideas and a broad knowledge base derived from exposure to multiple disciplines. And while most recruiters don't outright avoid business majors, companies in consulting, technology, and even finance say they're looking for candidates with a broader academic background. That's you. I'm not accustomed, I have to admit, to having my thinking about education affirmed by the Wall Street Journal. But in this case, the report confirms what I've been hearing from business and professional leaders for 18 years as a college president. What matters most in most professional settings is not technical knowledge, which can be gotten in other ways, but the ability to think and to communicate, to deploy one's creative and imaginative powers in a variety of contexts. I'd also insert here the power of the social knowledge that I discussed earlier, and the ability to go deep doesn't hurt either. Tomorrow, we are also honoring David Shaw, the very successful Maine entrepreneur and founder of IDEX Laboratories. I have a strong hunch that David shares this view of which talents and aptitudes matter most in the business world. I'll ask him. I began this talk with an extended reference to social networking. We hear those words now and we think immediately of Facebook and LinkedIn and Twitter, but you'll soon experience another kind of networking, also rooted in the immediate and embodied intimacy of the extended Colby community and family. That community now numbers well over 20,000 alumni in the United States and around the world. You will find them in every place you work and live, and you will discover in their presence the part of you that is still here. Call on them for help, for advice and friendship. I know you will find them eager to know you. This is one of the most important and enduring benefits of belonging to a community such as this one. As you meet these people, I hope you will come to feel, as they do, a keen sense of responsibility for Colby. This place now belongs to you as alumni in a new and powerful way. Its future well-being and its future generations of students will depend upon your affection and support, as its present strength and students depend on those who preceded you. You have a very good start on the road to giving back. Almost 65% of this class is already given to the senior class gift drive, and there's still time between now and tomorrow morning to shatter last year's record and reach your class goal of 80%. Thanks for this early and impressive expression of generosity. I hope and I know that it will continue. But giving back need not consist exclusively in philanthropy. Hundreds of Colby alumni and alumnae volunteer annually, serving as admission interviewers, class agents, advisors for the Career Center, and more. Your future association with Colby can touch many parts of your lives, and we hope it will. And of course, you also take your friendships with you. I can assure you that they will endure. At every one of the many stops I make in my annual tour of the country, I'm always impressed by the strength of the ties that bind classmates. These two are permanent acquisitions. Well, I've spent a lot of time today talking about things you have acquired here at Colby and that now leave with you, but no farewell of this kind would be complete without an acknowledgement of what you have given to us. I think I speak for every one of my colleagues here today on the faculty in saying that we are very grateful to you for letting us be involved in this remarkably interesting and promising time in your lives. For it is in this exhilarating work that we find our most important satisfactions and realize who we, in fact, are. In other words, for us, too, this enterprise is about the realization of potential. So thank you for your hard work, for your achievements, and for your commitment. Tomorrow is a more public day and occasion with happy crowds of family and friends looking on, and it will be sunny, we know. In the meantime, I'm grateful, we're all grateful, for this one last chance to think quietly and a bit more privately about where we have been together during these past several years. I look forward to seeing you at a young alumni breakfast or at a bicentennial celebration in the reasonably near future, and to learning of your accomplishments and your reflections on your Colby experience. For now, thank you again for your many contributions. Good luck to you, and goodbye.